A recent Supreme Court case could completely change how gun laws work in America, especially when it comes to suppressors and the National Firearms Act. This isn't just another close decision that barely squeaked by. Every single justice on the Supreme Court agreed on this one. That's right, all 9 of them voted the same way. Even the justices who were picked by presidents known for supporting gun control sided with this ruling. When you see that kind of agreement, you know something major just happened. Before we get into the details, I need you to do something really quick. Smash that like button right now if you care about protecting your Second Amendment rights. It only takes a second, and it makes a huge difference in getting this information out to more people who need it. Also, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future updates on your rights. Trust me, you're going to want to stay informed about this stuff. The case started out being about suppressors, but what it means goes way beyond just that one issue. This decision, combined with some leaked government documents, hidden crime statistics, and a constitutional problem that's been building for almost a century, is now unraveling a system that gun control supporters worked hard to maintain. Whether you already own a suppressor, want to get one someday, or simply believe the Second Amendment matters, you need to understand what just went down. This isn't just another court victory. This could be the beginning of a complete transformation in how gun laws are handled in this country. The Supreme Court didn't just barely agree on this case. They were completely united in their decision. That unity sends a powerful signal to everyone watching. In their 47-page written opinion, they tore apart arguments the government had been using for decades to justify restricting suppressors. They looked back at historical evidence to show that Second Amendment protections should cover these items. Justices who were appointed by administrations that traditionally opposed gun rights still joined in supporting this ruling. That tells you how strong the legal reasoning must have been. This decision isn't just about suppressors either. It changes the legal groundwork for how courts should look at all items covered under the National Firearms Act. When a ruling is unanimous, it's much harder for opponents to find ways around it or to challenge it later. This gives strength to future appeals and legal arguments all across the country. Suppressors might be where this started, but the doors this case opened lead to much bigger rooms. What makes this case truly historic isn't just the Supreme Court ruling itself. It's what the Department of Justice did. The DOJ actually reversed their previous position. They admitted that the old restrictions on suppressors don't hold up anymore under constitutional scrutiny. That kind of reversal is huge because it's not just about legal theory. It affects politics and how the entire system operates. What caused this flip? There was a classified internal memo that got out. That memo showed something shocking. There was zero measurable reduction in crime from banning or heavily restricting suppressors. The DOJ's legal brief now basically says that the logic they used before to justify these restrictions fails to meet constitutional standards. For the first time in years, the federal government is actually moving toward expanding gun rights instead of restricting them. The DOJ backing away from their old position removes the usual government support that challengers had to fight against. This opens up new opportunities to argue that not just suppressor bans, but many other National Firearms Act controls might be flawed too. Behind all of this was a leaked Department of Justice memo that became a game changer. This document revealed that banning or restricting suppressors hadn't produced any real benefit in reducing crime over the past several decades. Even more interesting, the data actually showed that states where more people owned suppressors had lower rates of gun crime. Once this memo became public, the DOJ couldn't keep defending their old position. They had to change their legal stance. The numbers in that memo were eye-opening. Suppressors were involved in less than 0.003% of crimes committed with firearms. That's an incredibly tiny fraction. Meanwhile, states where more people legally own suppressors actually recorded lower crime statistics. There are allegations that the ATF buried this information in their internal reports for years, keeping it from becoming public knowledge. The timing of when this memo leaked lined up remarkably well with when the Supreme Court was making its decision. This gave people challenging the restrictions solid facts to argue that these laws were arbitrary and didn't make sense. What had been a legal debate suddenly became a constitutional crisis. The DOJ's reversal exposed a much deeper problem that's been hiding for a long time. For nearly 100 years, federal courts have been using something called an intermediate scrutiny standard when looking at items covered by the National Firearms Act. But based on the logic from the Bruin decision, which was another major Supreme Court gun rights case, that standard might actually be unconstitutional. This means thousands of court cases over the years might have been decided using a flawed legal foundation. Courts were using balancing tests instead of looking at historical tradition, which is what the Supreme Court has now said they should be doing. Legal experts are now arguing that these old tests don't match up with current Supreme Court precedent. When you look at recent Second Amendment cases, analysts found that 89% of them use standards that are now considered problematic. The impact of this ruling could extend to short-barreled rifles, machine guns, and other items. This goes way beyond just suppressors. It's about fixing 90 years of legal doctrine that may have been applied incorrectly. The Supreme Court's opinion might explicitly overturn parts of that old approach, and that shift will completely change how all National Firearms Act litigation gets viewed going forward. The leaked documents and legal changes only scratched the surface of what was really going on. Freedom of Information Act documents and internal communications show what appears to be a decades-long effort to prevent Supreme Court review of these issues. There are allegations that the DOJ and ATF settled cases or worked to suppress cases that could have brought constitutional challenges to the Supreme Court. They apparently wanted to keep this issue from getting to the highest court. Senior DOJ memos reportedly show a strategy to prevent National Firearms Act cases from ever reaching the Supreme Court. Internal emails allegedly warned that the entire NFA enforcement system would fall apart overnight if the Supreme Court conducted a proper constitutional review. Authorities apparently coordinated to resolve cases quietly before they could be appealed to higher courts. This kind of systematic behavior kept constitutional questions from ever being properly argued in court. This wasn't just carelessness or oversight. This looks like a deliberate strategy that was built to protect a legal structure that might now be proven unconstitutional. And now that protective barrier has broken down. There's another angle to this story that involves money. What if the real reason suppressors stayed so heavily restricted wasn't actually about public safety, but about profit? Documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests show how the government built an entire enforcement system around suppressors. Federal agencies, private law firms, and industry gatekeepers have been making money from how complicated the system is for decades. And now that revenue stream is under threat. The federal government collects more than $240 million every year just from National Firearms Act tax stamps. The ATF employs over 800 agents whose jobs focus solely on NFA enforcement. The entire compliance industry that grew up around the National Firearms Act generates more than $1.8 billion per year. Legal trusts, dealer markups, and the artificial scarcity created by these regulations all depend on keeping these rules in place. These numbers show what's really on the line here. It's not just about legal theories. It's about billions of dollars in salaries, contracts, and regulatory fees. The moment the legal foundation for all of this falls apart, the business model that depends on it will collapse too. There's an international component to this story that most people don't know about. Congressional reports have revealed that foreign governments, including members of the European Union, have been quietly lobbying to keep America's suppressor laws the way they are. Why would they care about American gun laws? Because they use our laws to justify their own disarmament policies in their countries. If American laws change, it becomes harder for them to defend their own restrictions. Intelligence briefings show that foreign officials have directly lobbied American lawmakers on this issue. Since 2015, over $47 million has been funneled into gun control groups in the United States. European diplomats have pointed to National Firearms Act laws when defending their own bans in international forums. At least 12 major DOJ decisions were apparently influenced by pressure from foreign diplomats. This isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. This is documented foreign influence. Other nations have been working to keep laws in place that restrict your rights so they can continue restricting the rights of their own citizens. And now that alliance is starting to fall apart. For years, suppressor bans were sold to the public based on fear. People were told these were silent weapons that criminals would use, like something out of a movie. But real acoustic data and peer-reviewed scientific studies now prove the truth. Suppressors do reduce hearing damage, and they don't actually pose any real risk to public safety. Even with a suppressor attached, firearms still produce between 120 and 140 decibels of noise. That's louder than a rock concert or a jackhammer. They're definitely not silent. Medical studies have shown that suppressors reduce permanent hearing damage by 73%. Interestingly, in Europe, where gun laws are generally much stricter than in America, suppressors are actually encouraged for hunting. The research completely changes the narrative. The myth of the silent assassin is gone. What we're left with is basically a medical device that protects hearing being regulated as if it were as dangerous as a machine gun. The Supreme Court decision didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the final break in a system that was built on selective use of data, buried memos, and courts avoiding certain issues. For decades, the DOJ and ATF kept a lid on any serious reform of the National Firearms Act. But in 2025, that lid finally came off. Internal memos had warned that the entire NFA system could collapse if it ever got reviewed under modern constitutional tests. DOJ officials admitted in internal emails that they were using outdated legal standards. Court cases were settled early specifically to prevent Supreme Court involvement. The Bruin precedent exposed the legal errors and forced everything out into the open. The most important part of this collapse isn't what's already happened. It's what's coming next. This isn't a one-time event that ends here. It's the beginning of a chain reaction in the legal system. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision is just the first domino to fall. Now that the precedent has shifted, other items covered under the National Firearms Act are likely to face direct legal challenges. Things like short-barreled rifles, destructive devices, and potentially even machine guns could be next. The legal landscape isn't stable anymore. It's active and changing rapidly. If you found this information valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps get this critical information in front of more gun owners who need to know about these changes. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on your rights. Share this video with every gun owner you know because this information is too important to keep to yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.